Hey guys, Rob Avis here. In this video, we're going to talk about the 5 things that you need to know about in order to deep energy retrofit your house. And if you're looking for a house, these are the 5 things you're going to want to make sure that that house has in order for it to be eligible for a deep energy retrofit. So before we get into the video, we bought a farm. We're going to be retrofitting that house. We're going to be building this farm out to be the ultimate permaculture farm here in Alberta. And if you want to follow us along on that journey, hit the subscribe button below because we've got a ton of content coming out over the next couple of years. Let's get into it. I just got a comment on one of my videos and I wanted to address it in this video because I thought it was a really good question, specifically about what makes a house applicable for deep energy retrofit. And if you're following the series, you'll know that we've bought a farm, and one of the big selling features for us was finding the right piece of land with the right type of building, or buildings in this case, that kind of met our values and our vision. And so one of the things that's really important to me as a mechanical engineer is making sure that I can live in a way that allows me to not have to use fossil fuels for heating and for power. So while we have a ways to go on this house, it didn't really bug me that we were not meeting those goals initially because I have the ability to meet those goals. And so behind me right here is the house that we ended up getting with the property. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the features that you can see in this house. And as I'm talking, I'll try and shoot some B-roll so that you can get a better view of it right now because I've got a pretty wide angle on the lens. So it might be better to get a bit closer on some of the shots. So first thing you should notice, the aspect that's perpendicular to the lens right now, so the A-frame, that's actually facing east. And so the long part of the house, therefore, is facing south, which is the part that's exposed to the sun right now. And that was really important to me because that roof on the south there will become a collection surface, and I haven't decided what I'm going to collect on there yet. From an energy perspective, it's either going to be a solar air collector, so I'm going to re-roof it with an air gap underneath it to collect thermal energy, which I can then duct underneath into the crawl space, or it'll be a surface to mount solar panels to, photovoltaics for electricity, although I'm kind of leaning towards going to a racking, ground rack system so that I can keep the snow off of it and seasonally move the panels. Or it could also be solar thermal panels, which we have on our other house in Calgary, and this house is going to end up having them as well, or all of the above. So we're still in the design process. We don't know exactly what this is all going to look like, but when I'm looking at a house, I want to make sure that it has that kind of aspect to it. When we were in Australia, we met with a GIS professor in Sydney. I think it was at the Sydney University actually. And he had said something to me back then, this is almost 11 years ago now, that completely blew my mind. He had told me that all Western governments had mapped all the houses within cities, and maybe out in the rural areas as well, to determine whether or not they had the ability to collect solar energy. And he said that the real estate industry was just starting at the very, very early stages of ramping up to understand the value of a house relative to the solar thermal or solar electric energy it could capture. So if you're looking for a house in the country or in the city, this is a really important thing to make sure that the surfaces that are exposed to the sun have access to the sun. If you're in cities, houses get really tight together, and so you can end up getting a lot of shading. And that's going to become a future area of law that a lot of people haven't even considered yet. So that's one of the big things that I was looking for. Number 2, you'll notice that there's a lot of overhang on that roof. And so the overhang allows me to make sure that in the summertime, when my sun angle is quite high in the sky, over 60 degrees from horizontal, that the house, the surfaces to the south that are going to be potentially exposed to the sun are getting shaded. And so this keeps your house cooler in the summertime, and it keeps it warmer in the wintertime. So ideally the overhang allows the sun in the winter, and it rejects it in the summertime. So when we re-insulate this house, we'll be able to optimize the solar gain on the south side of the home for winter solar gain. And that's really important because correct placement of the right type of windows can reduce energy loss, or let me say it a different way, can supply up to 50% of the energy of a house. So that's pretty awesome. Like, just by getting the design right, we can knock 50% off of our utility bill. And so we're going to be replacing the windows in this, we know that. We're probably going to take some of the windows out because they're not useful. And we're going to be putting more windows on the south side to optimize our passive solar gain. Now, I hinted at it, we're also going to be re-insulating this house. This house has 2x6 walls in it, which you don't actually need. And actually, I wish that it had just been 2x4, to be honest, but 2x6 was what they were building in the 1990s. And so we're gonna actually strip off all the hardy plank, which is a cementatious siding. It's fireproof. It's actually a pretty good product. It's not the best product in the world, but it's better than vinyl siding. And we're probably going to fur out the walls by about 10 inches. So the goal for this climate is to get between R40 and R50. And as a result of taking the siding off and adding additional insulation, we're also going to tape up all the seams and try and get the air infiltration down. I haven't done my blower air door test yet, but that's one of the next tests that we're going to do. And my suspicion is that we have 3, 4, 5 air changes per hour in this house. And to put that in perspective, a passive house, which is one of the highest standards of building for residential homes, aims to get below 0.6 air changes per hour. So, and I think this is between 4 and 5 air changes per hour right now. There's a lot of drafts. It's really cold on the feet. It has a long way to go. And so because it's so inefficient, I actually think we can get this down 90% from what it is today, which I'm estimating at about 4,700 liters of propane per year, 6 cords of wood, and about 10,000 kilowatt hours of energy. And I just did the calculation yesterday. If we were going to take all the fossil fuel and the wood and the electricity out, and we were back in Roman times, this would require 392 slaves working 40 hours a week, because I'm nice, I'm not going to make them work 7 days a week. So 40 hours a week, 50 weeks of the year. We'll give them 2 weeks vacation too. So imagine on this quarter section that I had to house and feed almost 400 slaves just to keep that house warm and electrified. Now, of course, we would never do that. We would have our slaves going around and chopping wood, and so that's a force multiplier. But ultimately, the wood is just another way of collecting and storing energy, and so we can still look at that kind of whole energy picture. And the reason I use slaves is not because I'm a horrible person, but there's this book that I read not that long ago called The Energy of Slaves by Andrew Nikiforuk, and he relates energy usage to human energy, which I thought was a really brilliant concept for a couple of reasons. One, you can kind of wrap your head around how much energy you have as an individual to do work. And so it makes a gigajoule a heck of a lot more understandable, or a kilowatt hour or a liter of propane. You can kind of relate them back to human energy. And then also it makes you aware of how susceptible you are to the amount of energy that you use. So if all of a sudden we had a shortage of energy globally, you really get a sense of how dependent you are on that energy. And so our goal for this house is to get that energy consumption as low as possible, collect as much of it as we can on our land, so that we're not using after-tax dollars to pay for energy. And I'm not opposed to burning wood, but I want to get that wood consumption down to as low as I possibly can. So between 1 and 3 cords is what I'm shooting for. And in an ideal world, if we get the insulation right on this house, we get the windows right, we get the air infiltration right, then this house will never go below 0 even if I don't heat it. And so we call that thermal resilience. And so there was a study that I can link to in the show notes below, where the city of Toronto did a study on various qualities or thermal resistances of specific homes, and they tested them based on their thermodynamic resilience, essentially. And the ones that were basically passive house, met passive house standards, at -20 Celsius, these houses didn't drop more than 2 degrees Celsius inside. So they went from 21 degrees Celsius to about 18 degrees Celsius over 2 weeks. So that means that in spite of the fact that they had no energy going into the house other than what they were collecting from the sun, these houses only dropped 2 degrees in 2 weeks at minus 20 degrees Celsius, which to me is just amazing. This house here, if that happened, would end up, all the pipes would freeze, there'd be contraction probably of all the walls, so there'd be cracks that show up in the walls, the windows might even crack depending on the pressure that's put on them. It would not do well in a really cold snap if it went from warm to cold really quickly. Now, people do shut their houses down without damage and stuff, but those houses are designed to be shut down. This one's not. So anyways, hopefully you found that interesting. So I'll just recap this. So we talked about the right aspect of the roof to be able to collect energy, whether it's thermal or electric or solar air or solar water, which is the thermal piece. We talked about good overhangs so that you can fur out the walls without causing or compromising the envelope. And so these have really good envelopes. We talked about access to the south sun on a southern surface for passive solar gain. We talked about having good eaves, not just for the insulation, but also to reject the sun in the summertime and allow it in the wintertime. And those are the kind of primary things that I look for. I guess there's one last bonus item that we didn't talk about, which was that simple shapes are better. And so a lot of the new modern houses have very complex shapes on them, complex roof lines, overhangs or cantilevers in the building construction to try and make it look more interesting. And those make it harder to retrofit, more expensive to retrofit, and generally less efficient. So hopefully that kind of gave you guys a sense of what I look for in a house. And as we go through the renovation of this house, we'll talk about all those details in a much more granular fashion so that you guys can get really clear on it. Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you in the next video.